When you look at companies like Pizza Hut or Domino's, what do you hear? Do you hear unbridled sounds of capitalism where, everything's just going ka-ching? Or do you hear... Hello, you absurd junkies. Welcome back to another episode of Absurd Curiosity Podcast. I'm your host, Cole Adam Davis, and it's been a long time since I last posted a video. In fact, it's probably been almost a year. And the reason that is I got a job with a rocket company and moved all the way across the United States, started, working missions, and it's just been hectic ever since. But this leads me to today's video. While working one day, I stumbled across a news article talking about how Pizza Hut sponsored this Russian rocket, and it had a huge 30-foot advertisement on it. And the more I dove into it, the more I went on this long journey of what the hell are American companies doing in a post-Soviet era world? And it's just fascinating to me, so I really wanted to bring this story to you. But before we get into the topics today, I want to ask, have you ever been to another country? And it's okay if you haven't, it's just whenever you initially either drive into the country or land in the country, the initial impression is this place is kind of weird. And nothing wrong with them, just foreign countries just have... They're weird because their laws are different and their cultures are different. For example, China has such terrible copyright laws. They have fake Starbucks stores. They got fake Disney stores. They even have entire fake Apple stores. Seriously, the amount of fraud and copyright infringement in China is deserving on its own video. It just deserves an hour-long video on how this weird country is able to just steal whatever they want. But in Russia, they take the corporate oddity to a whole other level. Like in China, they're stealing it. But in Russia, they work with the companies, and they do the most absurd things. But first, a little background history. Near the end of the Soviet Union, the economy started to open back up to the Western world. This meant mainstream American conglomerates could finally expand into the Russian territory and rake in that sweet money. Which, little side note, basically all of this progress of American companies entering Russia and Russia being very open to the Western world has essentially been eradicated with the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, so take it with a grain of salt. But back to the story, American conglomerates and Russia have had the most bizarre history. And the more I look into it, the more it starts to seem like this weird fever dream. And that fever dream starts with Pizza Hut. Thanks to the former Soviet Union president Mikhail Gorbachev's open Western world policies, a lot of American conglomerates could open up stores in Russia. Side fact, as I was recording this episode, I actually got an alert on my phone, from Twitter, actually, that the former president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, the one that I just mentioned that opened up the Soviet Union to Western companies and Western policies, passed away. Rest in peace. There's this very obscure commercial from Pizza Hut from 1997, and I'm sure some of you have heard of it, but if you haven't, there's a commercial with Pizza Hut where the Soviet dictator Gorbachev, in which the Russian people are in a Russian Pizza Hut, and they start arguing over whether the president was a failure or not. And then, all of a sudden, they just start screaming, "Yay! Pizza Hut!" And it doesn't quite make sense. But here, for your viewing pleasure...
Это Горбачев.
Горбачев.
Это из-за него у нас в экономике бардак.
Да благодаря ему у нас новые возможности.
Это из-за него у нас политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас свобода.
Полный хаос.
Перспективы.
Политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас есть Pizza Hut.
За Горбачева!
За Горбачева!
За Горбачева! За Горбачева!
Sometimes nothing brings people together like a nice hot pizza from Pizza Hut.
there's a lot of speculation on why Gorbachev agreed to do this Pizza Hut ad along with his Louis V ad in 2007, but he was quoted in CNN saying, "I'm in the process of creating a library and a perestroika archive, and the project requires certain funds. If I didn't see that it was beneficial for the people, I wouldn't have agreed to do it." Now, is this why he did it? We don't know. But some experts say that this was a signal of death for communism, and it reigned in the era for prosperity for capitalism. Now, this leads us to the 2000s for a famous group project you might have heard of, the International Space Station. Yes, that one. NASA, or the Americans, had a budget of $13 billion a year to get the International Space Station where it needed to be. The Russians, on the other hand, Roscosmos, only had $170 million a year. So, for the Russians to hold up their end of the deal, they had to get creative, and they had to find new, innovative ways to get money to fund their piece of the International Space Station. For those asking, where would they get that money? Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut is one of the places that they would get that money. The Proton K rocket was scheduled to launch on July 12th in year 2000, and on the side of it was a 13-foot-long Pizza Hut logo. According to the Russian spokesperson at the time, the money was used to build out the building that would build the Proton rocket. But Pizza Hut didn't really want to just stop at the big logo. According to people that were familiar with the project, Pizza Hut wanted to use laser beams and projectors to project a Texas-sized logo onto the moon so that when anyone looked up to the moon, they could see the large Pizza Hut logo. Can you imagine going outside and seeing that large Pizza Hut logo? I would be pissed. Now, of course, this didn't happen because the technology that would be necessary to pull this off, to project a Texas-sized logo onto the moon, would be around estimated $300 million to do so. Now, if you thought Pizza Hut was crazy, just wait till you hear about Pepsi. When you go to the restaurant and the waitress or waiter ask you, what would you like to drink? And you say Coke, and then they come back with like, oh, we actually don't have Coke, but we have Pepsi. Now you kind of get a little upset. Not the Russians. Apparently the Russians love it, and they couldn't get enough of that shit. They were drinking it like it was going back out of style back in the 1970s. In the 1970s, the Soviet Union and Pepsi had an agreement where the Soviet Union would trade massive quantities of their state-backed distillery vodka to Pepsi, and Pepsi would in turn send massive amounts of Pepsi Cola to the Soviet Union. This agreement went downhill rapidly, even more so when Russia invaded Afghanistan. Pepsi sold the Russian state-backed vodka in American stores, and since Russia was indirectly fighting the US and Afghanistan, North American buyers quickly lost interest in the Russian state-backed vodka, and this almost forced Pepsi to close the deal. And during this time, the Russian government didn't want to let down their people, and fearing that their flow of sweet, delicious Pepsi would end, they decided to get creative. So the Russian government, out of fears, approved the trade of 1 cruiser, 1 frigate, 1 destroyer, 17 submarines, and a handful of oil tankers. This one trade for Pepsi Cola temporarily made the Pepsi company the 6th largest navy in the world. Now, of course, most of these ships weren't battle ready at the time. In fact, most of them were either leaning to the side whenever they were going to their port in Sweden to where they would be dismantled and sold for scrap. But as I was reading this, I was thinking, how can an American company have all this hardware and not have any pushback from the Department of Defense? And I was right. At the time, the Pentagon wasn't really happy about the deal. In fact, they were very frequently open about the disdain that they had about the Russian government giving Pepsi all this hardware, which Pepsi's CEO at the time, Donald Kendall, responded to the U.S. military with, "I am dismantling the Soviet Union faster than you are," which, I'm going to be honest with you, is one of the most baller one-liners that I have ever seen thrown at the U.S. military. Thank you all for watching this video. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps this small channel grow. Let me know if you would like to hear more about different American companies in different countries, or if you would like to learn about the black market in China and how they just steal everything. Copyrights mean nothing over there, apparently. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and please let me know how I can improve. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.